All right, good morning. Our Daf Yomi is sponsored by, for the whole month, by Jeff and Chafabela Wald, Le'ilu Nishmas, Jeff's father, Mr. Roman Wald, Avram ben Shmuel, Zichron Livracha, and grandfather, Mr. Menachem Eisner, Menachem Mendel ben Mordechai, Zichron Livracha's Yortzites, who are on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. May their neshamos have an aliyah. And Daf Yomi for the month is also sponsored by Shmuli and Miriam Fuchs. Le'ilu Nishmas, Shmuli's mother, Bela Yenta Bas Chuna Zichron Livracha, whose Yortzeit is on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. May her neshama have an aliyah. We,
what did you name his son again? Daughter again?
Leah Emuna.
Leah Emuna. Beautiful. Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. We are on the 8th and final suggestion. We had a problem. We had a circumstance where a person had an animal that designated as a korban toda, and he made a tamura with that animal as well. And then he mixed the two of them up, and then one of the animals died. And so now he's got one animal remaining, and we don't know exactly what to do with it. Can't bring it, because then we would have a problem with whether we should bring bread or not together with it. If it's the korban toda, it needs bread. You can't go without it. And if it's a tamura, it doesn't get bread, and we can't do with it. So what are we supposed to do? So we had 7 potential recommendations of how to solve the problem. We don't like any of them. And now we're up to Ravina Ikla Lidimahuria. So Ravina went to a place called Dimahuria, which is someplace in Bavel. Amar le Rav Dimi Braid Rav Huna Midimahuria le Ravina. So Rav Huna, who was from there, said to Ravina, V'leise behema, let's do this. Bring an animal, Velema, and he can make the following declaration. Hare alai, right? I am now responsible for bringing a toda. So now he's done this. So he's going to take a second animal. Velesi shmonim behada. He's going to take 80 loaves together with it. Velema. He's going to make the following statement. Ihach de kaima tamurahi. If the first one's a tamura, so honey tarte todos. So then he's going to take 2 animals. And he's going to say, then, if the first one is the first one is the tamura, then these 2 animals that I just brought, those are my 2 todos. And this is going to be the 80 loaves of both of them. Toda, if the first one winds up being a toda, so then had amri alai nami lehavi toda, then the one which I said was going to be upon me, as I separated originally for korban toda, that will also be a toda. Now I've got 2 todas. V'hashmonim detarvaihu, and then that will give me 80 loaves for the 2 of them. What happens to the third animal? V'idach tehave la'achrayus. The third one will then just be my backup animal, right? And my backup animal, we said that if you separate off and you say, I'm going to have a second backup animal, then that second backup animal doesn't require chalos, doesn't require bread, as long as you've already satisfied your obligation with your hare alai requirement. So Amar Lei, so he said back, okay, fair enough, but here's why we don't do that. The Torah says in Koheles that it's better don't promise something than to promise and not deliver. Right? Better don't promise. So there you go. And you're going to say, okay, let's go make the promise. In other words, the whole concept in the first place, you're right, that would solve the problem. But it creates another problem, which we're going to consider to be a bigger problem, which is that you took an oath in the first place. Don't promise to do anything. That's based. Don't promise. Don't use this language of hare alai when you're taking on animals. It's a bad practice to say I am now responsible for a korban. Right? If you want to say I'm going to give this as a korban, fine. That's one thing. If you want to say I am responsible now for a korban, you're setting yourself up for mistakes. So therefore, don't do that in the first place. So even though that would solve the problem that we have with the second animal, we are going to create other risks unnecessarily, and we would like to avoid doing that, which is interesting. We go as far as avoiding that risk and wind up having no solution for the first animal rather than get ourselves, right? It's like throwing good money after bad, as they say, right? You get yourself into a bigger pickle. So don't do that. Okay, next Mishnah. Ha'omar harei alai toda. Person says, as we said, don't do this, but person says, right, I am going to be responsible for korban toda. Now, the Mishnah says, Yavihi v'lachma min achulin. I've got to pay for the animal and my bread from non-consecrated money, right? Because I'm going to have other obligations. Could be like for most of what the Gemara is going to be talking about is I've got my product, my produce, right? I've got to separate some off, give it to a Levi, and then I have a second tithe. Now, in some years that goes to poor people, but in other years I keep it myself and I bring it to Yerushalayim. And I can use that money in Yerushalayim in any way I want. One way that was popular is to buy korbanos once I get there, and then I eat those korbanos, and then I am fulfilling my obligation of my trumas, my ma'aser sheni, and I'm going to be bringing lots of korbanos. So it's a beautiful thing. But if I promise, I say I am responsible for a korban toda, don't use any other money. He's got to just bring brand new money from his pocket that he's never consecrated before. Toda alai min achulin v'lachma min ma'aser. Let's say he makes the declaration, my toda itself, the animal is going to be from, we're on Pei Aleph and Beis, my toda itself is going to be from the unconsecrated produce, v'lachma min ma'aser. But the bread, it's going to be my ma'aser sheni money. So yavihi v'lachma min achulin. Then he has to bring the bread and the animal itself from the chulin. Why? As we're going to see why that should be. Since the animal has to come from chulin, the bread cannot come from chulin as well. Toda min amaser, if he says that the toda is going to come from my ma'aser sheni money, v'lachma min chulin, but the bread is going to come from chulin, so then yavi, so then he can bring it exactly that way. Bring the toda from the ma'aser and the bread from the chulin money. He v'lachma min ma'aser, if he says both the animal and the bread is going to come from his ma'aser money, yavi, that's okay, you can do that. The only thing is that don't make the mistake and think that if I actually have wheat that is my ma'aser sheni, that I should use that to make my bread. What I should do is I should redeem the ma'aser sheni onto money, and then I should use the money to buy the bread. That's what's going to be. We'll discuss why that should be. Okay. Amar Rav Huna, so the Gemara says, Rav Huna says, Ha'omer harei alai lachmei toda. Person says, I am responsible to bring the bread of a korban toda, right? Even though he hasn't said anything about the korban itself, he just said, I'm going to bring bread of a toda, mevi toda levalachma. That is an oath that requires him to bring the korban together with the bread, because how can he bring the bread without bringing the animal? So therefore, the oath is going to be requiring him to bring both things. My taima. What's the reason for that? Because the person knows you can't bring the bread without the offering. So the high toda v'lachma kamar, when he says, I'm bringing the bread, he means I'm bringing the korban together with the bread. So why did he say bread if he meant that? So sof milsa nakod. He said, because that's the end of my story, right? I'm going to end up bringing the bread. So therefore, he meant. So therefore, whatever, when the rules of oaths, we sort of wind up with this dichotomy, try to figure out what is the intent of what he's saying, and then he actually has to speak out what he's saying sometimes as well. So in this circumstance, speaking out the bread, that's enough to be considered as though he brought the entire offering, because that was his intention in the first place. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah. Toda min ma'aser v'lachma min chulin. Person says, I'm going to bring the korban toda from my ma'aser money, but the bread is going to come from my chulin money. Yavi kimashanadar, you can bring exactly as you promised. So am I. Why is that the case? If you're going by whatever he said last, then the last thing he said was he was going to bring his bread from non-consecrated product. So then why shouldn't the animal also have to be done that way? So the answer is Shani Hasam. That's different because Kevin Damar told him in a meiser, since he specified where he wanted the animal to come from, he wanted to use his meiser sheni money. That's as though a person would make an oath saying, I'm going to donate so-and-so's, the bread for so-and-so's offering. Meaning he has no intention of bringing a new original offering. He's saying specifically, my bread is for so-and-so's offering. Then obviously he doesn't have to bring his own offering, right? So here too, he's specifying the bread which is coming from chulin, which I'm going to use, is to pair up with an offering that I'm specifying is coming from meiser. That's fine. That's a valid use. We don't always say that if he's going to pledge bread, that it means that he has a fresh offering that has to go with it. Ihachi. Well, if that is the case, right? That's how that works. So then Reisha, what about in the first case of our Mishnah? Dekatani, the Mishnah says, Toda min chulin, if he says the toda comes from the chulin bread, v'lachmana min meiser, and the bread is going to come from the meiser money, yavihi v'lachma min chulin, then he's got to bring the bread and the animal from the chulin. Why is that? If he specified it very clearly, the animal's coming from meiser, they specify clearly that the animal's coming from chulin and the bread is coming from meiser, why does the whole thing have to come from chulin now? So the answer is hachinami nase kobar harei todolif tor lachmo shel ploni. Why shouldn't it be? You're just specifying that my bread is to take care of so and so's korban. Whatever he says goes. So what's the problem with what he said? So he says hachi hashta. That's not quite the same thing at all. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Bishlama lechem lemiftar toda asi. I understand when you could make a pledge and say that my bread is coming to take care of a korban toda. Toda lemiftar lechem mi asya. But no one would ever say, hey, I've got bread to give, so therefore let me put this korban toda up in order to take care of the bread. That's backwards.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. Ma'aseh Rishon is given to the Levi.
Correct.
How is he donating to the Levi a Toda?
He's not.
So what does it say?
This is Meiser Sheni. This is all Meiser Sheni. We're not talking about Meiser Rishon at all.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Everything,
Thank you.
we're going to shorthand it always. We're saying, Meiser, we're always talking about the Meiser Sheni, right? This is
Right.
his money. He can eat it. He just has to take it to Yerushalayim to eat it. But now he's going to use it in order to buy this korban. Now that we said that the korban is from chulin, and then the bread, well, he can't say the bread comes from Meiser anymore. Because once he's suggested that the animal is going to come from chulin, the bread comes after the animal, and therefore that extra statement that he's going to use Meiser money in order to pay for the bread for this animal does not bear weight, right? So you can't do that. So Toshma. Okay, so now we're going to ask this question, this idea from Rav Huna, that if a person says Rav Huna's statement was, I'm going to bring bread, he's got to bring an animal to go with it, right? Because that's what he meant. So ha'omer, now this brisa. Ha'omer harei alai toda below lechem. Somebody says, I'm going to bring a korban toda with no bread, right? Zevach below nesachim. I'm going to bring a korban shlamim or a korban ola or whatever, but I'm not bringing the wine that goes together with that animal. So you can't do that. Kofinoso mevi toda v'lachma. You've got to force him now. We're going to go and send him a bill. He's got to pay for the bread, and we're going to make it come with bread. Zevach unesachim. And you got to bring the animal, and you got to bring the wine. So now, taima de amar, that's the whole reason why that is the circumstance here, why he's going to have to bring the bread, is because he says, he's saying, right, he's got to bring the bread that comes with it. Aval lo amar toda, lo, right? But if he didn't say, right, if he doesn't say that he's bringing a korban toda, so it doesn't go the other way. The way this sounds is, if I bring a toda, we force him to bring the bread. But the brisa does not say the reverse. If I say bread, then I force him to bring the animal. So that sounds like the opposite of what Rav Huna says. So the answer is, the Gemara says, no. Huadin afagav delo amar toda. No, that would work. It works the other way also. If you said bread, we force him to bring the korban together with it. But then why doesn't it list that? Because ID the kaboy lemisnei zevach below nesachim. Because this brisa has two cases, right? The brisa has the case of an animal without the bread, and it also has the animal without the wine together with it. That animal without the wine does not have a corresponding reverse case. You can't say, I'm going to bring the wine without the animal, and then the halacha would be, since you're bringing wine, we force you to bring the animal, because that's not true. If you said, I'm going to bring wine as my sacrifice, then wine's your sacrifice. That's it. We're not going to force you to bring an animal together with it. It's only when we say, I'm going to bring the bread, that we presume that he means also the animal. So therefore, Tananami told we only bring the first side of this, where we bring the animal that forces the bread, and the animal forces the wine, as this brisa, because that's what this brisa is referring to. It is also true that Rav Huna's statement is true, that if I said bread, I would force the person to bring the animal as well. The two go hand in hand. Okay, so now the brisa says, somebody says, I'm going to bring an olah, but no bread. So then he has to bring the olah. He's going to bring the toda and no bread. So he brings the toda and he's forced to bring the bread. So the question is, amai? Why is that the case? Neder upischo imohu. This is an example of somebody saying an oath, but then together in his oath statement, he is reneging on his oath. right? Because what's he saying? I'm going to bring a toda, but no bread. Well, what does he mean by no bread?
Wouldn't
That means no toda.
You mean like backtracking?
Backtracking, exactly. I'm undoing my own oath. So why do you have to bring the animal of the bread? You should bring nothing, because I retracted. I'm going to, right?
You made an oath.
But your oath, you also removed the oath in the same sentence,
Okay.
right?
You
Did you make an oath or didn't you? You said no bread. Well, if you meant that you were going to bring a toda, you wouldn't have said no bread. So the no bread removes the toda off, the toda oath. So Amar Chizkiah explains how many I will tell you that this is an argument that exists other places, and this is Beis Shammai's opinion. Beis Shammai Damri Tfos Loshon Rishon. He says that when you have a statement that has two parts to it, right? The first part is the primary statement, and the second part is meaningless, right? Which we learn in Maseches Nazir. It's not Mishnah Maseches Nazir. Hareini Nazir. If a person says, "I am going to be a Nazir," min hagros from dried figs. Well, a Nazir has no problem with dried figs. So therefore, what is he saying? I'm a Nazir, in which case he's a Nazir, or I won't eat dried figs, in which case has nothing to do with him being a Nazir. So umina dveila, or from dried dates. So Beis Shammai omrim Nazir. Beis Shammai says you're a Nazir. You said Nazir, right? So that's it. You're a Nazir. Who cares what you said second? Your statement, the second part of your statement is irrelevant to the first part. Well, Beis Hillel omrim eino Nazir. Beis Hillel says you're not a Nazir because the second part of the statement qualifies the first part. You can't understand the first part without including the second part, and so therefore the second part undoes the first part. And so that sounds like that's what's happening here. A person says I'm doing a toda with no bread. Same thing. So Rabbi Yochanan says no. Afilu tema Beis Hillel. In our case, it's different because even Beis Hillel would agree because beomer ilu hayisi yodea she'ein nodrin kach lo hayisi noder kach. Right. What happens is if the person can say, "I did not know you could not take this oath right, that way. I thought I could bring a korban toda. I don't like bread; it's too many carbs. So I thought I could bring my korban toda without bread. If I had known that I couldn't bring it without bread, I wouldn't have said anything. I would have just said, I'll bring a korban toda, right? Ella kach. I would have just said, I'll bring the korban toda with the bread. So therefore, this circumstance, his second statement is actually a mistaken statement and it's meaningless. That's why he still has to bring the bread. Umay kofin, well, if that's the case, what does that mean you're forcing him to? You're not forcing him to. You explained it to him, and he goes, oh, I didn't realize, I guess I'll bring the bread. That's not forcing a guy to bring the bread. So the answer is, to kaboy hadarbe. The answer is that you went back and you explained it to him. That's the forcing, meaning you go back to him and say, I'm sorry, I know you donated an animal, but you're going to have to pay for the bread too, because you can't make that oath. Oh, okay, I didn't realize, right? But in fact, if he had made the statement, no, I'm changing my mind. I only want to bring a toda that has no bread, then that, in fact, according to Beis Hillel, would be no oath, and you wouldn't have to bring it. Toshma, come and listen. A proof to Chizkiah's statement from the Brisa. Ha-omer harelai toda below lechem. Somebody says, I am going to bring a korban toda with no bread. So then, v'zevach below nesachim, where I'm going to bring an animal with no wine together with it. V'amrulo, and they say to him, Havei toda v'lachem, v'zevach unesachim. No, you got to bring the bread. If you bring a toda, you're bringing the animal, you got to bring the wine. V'omer ilu hayisi yodea shekain lo hayisi noder. And he says, if I knew I had to bring the bread, or if I knew I had to bring the wine, I would never have taken the oath in the first place. Kofin oso. So then we force him, v'omrim lo shmur v'shamata. And we say to him, Shemur v'shamata. That's what the pasuk says, right? The pasuk in Devarim says, Shemur v'shamata is called Devarim. You've got to follow the oath, right? You got to follow the oath and listen. So now, Bishlama lechizkiah. So I understand according to Chizkiah nichale. So then I understand this brisa. Why? Because this is Beis Shammai's opinion, right? Beis Shammai says, I don't care what you said second, right? He's saying, but I never meant it. I never would have. Who cares what you meant? Beis Shammai says, your first part of your statement is primary, and therefore you're obligated to bring your offering, and we're forcing you to do it, even though you said I never would have brought it in the first place. El Rabbi Yochanan kasha, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says no, our brisa could even follow Beis Hillel. Well, why would that be? According to the way Rabbi Yochanan explained it, if you go over to the guy and explain to him, right, you got to bring your bread, he's supposed to say, oh, I realize, okay, I guess I'll bring my bread. But if he says, no, I would never have made such an oath, then the oath should be canceled. So what's going on here? So Amar Lach Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan will explain to you. Havad de Beis Shammai. You're right. This brisa for sure is Beis Shammai. I was only explaining how the other doesn't have to be Beis Shammai. This one is clearly Beis Shammai. This one is clearly, because clearly they went over to the guy and said to him, you got to bring your bread. And he said, no way. Okay, so then you're forcing him, that's Beis Shammai. Okay, so what is it, my Shmur v'shamata? Why are we quoting a pasuk in Dvarim to him, Shmur v'shamata? You got to guard it and listen. What does that mean? Amar Abai explains, Shmur, you have to guard what you said, right? Have toda, you've got to bring your toda. V'shamata, and you've got to listen to the intent, have lachma, that you also have to bring the bread. You can't just, do what you said. You've got to do what you said. You're obligated to. You can't backtrack from that. And now you got to listen to the rules. Rava Amar Rava says, Shmur have toda v'lachma. Rava says Shmur means you got to follow the rules. And therefore, you got to bring the korban toda, and you got to bring the bread, and you have no choice. Vishamata, and you better listen. Shalote ragilasos kain. Don't get used to messing around with your oaths, right? Don't ever do this again. That's what Vishamata. Better heed this rule for the future.
Beis Shammai has no mercy.
Who doesn't?
Beis Hillel?
Beis Hillel Beis Hillel is known for their mercy, right? Beis Hillel is known for it.
Beis Shammai has no mercy, I said.
Right. So Beis Shammai has less mercy. That is generally the case. And in this circumstance, Beis Shammai also has no tolerance for you to not bring your korban. Okay, says the Mishnah. He v'lachma min meiser yavi. He says, I'm going to bring the korban toda and the bread from meiser money. That's fine. You could do that. So yavi lo sagi de lo maisi. So that means he's supposed to bring the bread of the toda and the bread specifically from his meiser. Now, he said he was going to bring it from meiser. Now he better do exactly that, right? He can't now bring it with not meiser money, right? He can't say, well, I had to bring the korban toda, so I brought a toda. No, you better bring it from meiser. That was your oath, so you better follow through and do. You bring it from chulin, right? Right. So why is that? Right? It should seem. I mean, you followed through. You did what you said. You said you're going to bring your offering, and you did it. But the Mishnah seems to be like, you better bring it exactly as you said. So Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda Amri, both Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda said, Ratza mevi, lo ratza, lo yavi. No, really what the Mishnah seems to mean is that you've got a choice now, right? You said, I'm going to bring it from Meiser. So if you want to bring it from Meiser, then go right ahead. But if not, so then go ahead and bring it chulin, even better, right? There's no need to do it specifically from Meiser just because that was your oath. Your oath actually was, I will bring it from Meiser. For sure, it would be even better if I brought it from chulin, right? That's an upgrade. So therefore, that's not a violation of your... Kaika kal v'chomer, right? It's an upgrade, and therefore, I'm not in violation of my oath if I bring it from chulin money. That's even better. Okay. Lo yavi michitim. It's like somebody says, I'm going to donate $1,000 to the shul, and then he gets up to get an aliyah, and he says, this $100 of this aliyah is going to go towards my $1,000 pledge. Yeah. And then later he says, nah, I'll give the $1,000. I'll give the $100 also. Well, good. That's fine. It's not like you violated your oath by adding, right? It's no worse, right? Even this is a little bit, okay. Lo yavi, right, but this is even more so. Okay, so now, the Mishnah says, V'lo yavi michiti meiser sheni, ela mimos meiser sheni. The only thing is you can't use the actual wheat that's meiser sheni wheat. You figure, I've got wheat, I grew wheat, now I'm using as my meiser sheni, bake that into the bread and use that as my korban. That you should not do. What you should do is sell it or redeem it, and then you've got the money, and then use the money and buy bread for your korban. So why is that? Rav Nachman, Rav Chisda, Damri Tarvaihu. Rav Nachman, Rav Chisda says, Lo shanu ela michite meiser sheni. Aval michitin halakuchos mi meiser sheni yavi. Right? When it says you're not allowed to bring the lachme toda from wheat that is meiser sheni, so that's a problem. Can't bring wheat from meiser sheni, but you can bring from wheat that was purchased using money that came from Meiser Sheni. That you're allowed to do, as our Mishnah says. Yosef Rabbi Yirmiyah Kamid Rabbi Zera v'Yosef v'Kamer. So Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting before Rabbi Zera, and he said the following: Lo shanu ela michite Meiser Sheni. He says that we're only allowed to take it from the wheat of Meiser Sheni. V'amechitin halakuchos b'maos Meiser Sheni yavi. I'm only not allowed to bring the korban from the wheat itself. That's Meiser Sheni, but I can use money that was purchased from Meiser Sheni to purchase the bread that I want. Amar le Rabbi Atamar Keno Eino Alafilu Mechitin Lakuchos B'Mos Meiser Sheni Lo Yavi. Says, well, Rabbi, you say that I can use the money. Maybe I can't even, right? Maybe I can't even bring the korban toda money from bread that I used bought from Meiser Sheni money as well. Ve'ema Tami Didi, Ve'ema Tami Didach. And I will tell you your reasoning to explain to you why you say you can bring from the money, and I will explain to you my reasoning why maybe you can't if you read the psukim. First, let's start with your reason, which is the Mishnah, which is everybody who we've been saying that you could bring it from the money, because the pasuk says, where is the source that you're allowed to bring korban toda using Meiser Sheni funds? Mishlamim, right? Says that you're allowed to bring, it's a gzera shava from the shlamim, sham mi meiser, right? We have two psukim. Pasuk says by the shlamim, v'zavach the shlamim v'achal sham. You should slaughter the shlamim, you should eat it there in Yerushalayim. And by Meiser Sheni, it says v'achal sham lifnei Hashem. You're allowed to eat it there before Hashem. So it says sham. So by a shlamim, I'm allowed to, if I buy a korban shlamim, that is Meiser Sheni. That's fine. So that's where the pasuk comes from. Then we know from the korban toda is that I'm allowed to bring from Meiser. That comes from Meiser, right? Because the toda is called the shlamim. As we've said, the toda, if somebody wants to bring a korban toda, he brings his shlamim from the animals, right? So we know a korban toda is a shlamim. So therefore a shlamim can come from Meiser Sheni. So therefore the korban toda can come from Meiser Sheni money as well. Now, umina. So now we have from the ruling itself, that I'm allowed to connect Meiser Sheni over to the korban toda. Ma shlamim ein gufon meiser. We would go one step further. A korban shlamim can't be meiser funds. Why is that? Because meiser is crops. It's things that are grown. A shlamim is an animal. So therefore, obviously, a shlamim can't be the meiser itself. It has to be things bought from the meiser money. So af toda nami. So let's go to that, explain that rule must exist by the korban toda as well. Since the toda and the shlamim have the same rule, so the korban toda as well. Ein gufa meiser. You also can't you can't bring the bread from the Meiser Sheni itself. V'hani chiti halakuchos b'Meiser Sheni nami ein gufan meiser. So therefore, the wheat that you're going to buy can't be the Meiser Sheni. You can't use the Meiser Sheni wheat itself. You've got to actually buy Meiser Sheni produce as well. So that's your reasoning, right? That's the concept that since the shlamim isn't Meiser Sheni, so too nothing from the toda can be actual Meiser Sheni. But I can use money that's redeemed Meiser Sheni. That I can use. Okay, so that's the rule. Now, Ema time in the deep, but I'm going to tell you my reasoning as well. Toda mehecha kayalfinola. What is the source for the korban toda? Mishlamim. Right? The korban toda is again from shlamim. Ushlamim sham shami meiser. And we said that the shlamim is the derivation is sham from meiser. Ma shlamim ein min meiser. Af toda ein min meiser. And we said, right, the review first, right, that the toda, just like the shlamim isn't coming from the meiser itself, it's coming from funds. So to the toda is going to come from not from the meiser itself. It's going to come meiser. La fuki chitin halakuchos b'maos meiser sheni demin meiser ninhu, which means to exclude that if I took that money and I bought more wheat and I want to use that wheat now, I can't use that either. Why? Because also that comes from Meiser Sheni. So we're going to extend, I'm going to extend it one step further. Just as the shlamim can't come from something that I purchased for Meiser Sheni, so therefore also if I purchase wheat for Meiser Sheni money, I can't use that for the breads either. Okay, so maybe that's what's going on there as well. So I'm not going to use Meiser Sheni funds as well. Okay. Right, so therefore when the Mishnah says that I'm allowed to use the funds for Meiser Sheni, it's not saying buy wheat and from your Meiser Sheni funds and then make bread out of it. It means just buy the loaves directly, right? Take Meiser Sheni money and buy the loaves already made. That's what it's suggesting. Okay. Because I can't use on wheat, which is a type of product that would be a Meiser Sheni product, so that I can never use. Amar Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami says, Hamatfis mos Meiser Sheni l'shlamim. If somebody sets aside, he takes his Meiser Sheni money, and he says, this is going to be my shlamim. Lo kanu shlamim. That the kedusha of the shlamim doesn't make this money doesn't become sanctified as shlamim money, right? He can change his mind, and he can decide he wants to use this money for something else. He says, "This is my Meiser Sheni money. This is going to be for shlamim." And now he goes to the store and he goes, "Oh, I'd rather have that," and he wants to buy a cake with it. Go ahead, buy the cake if you want. My time of why is that? Delo alima kedusha sheshlamim mechal kedushas ma'aser sheni. Because the kedusha of shlomim isn't strong enough to go on to ma'aser sheni money. When something already has, if you had regular money that had no sanctity to it at all, and you say, I'm going to designate this as a shlomim, fine, then that becomes money that's sanctified for your shlomim. But once this money already has a sanctification, so to speak, on it, it's ma'aser sheni, the shlomim cannot now, it's not the shlomim designation, which is a financial, it's a financial obligation. I can't pledge on something that's already pledged, basically. This money is already pledged as ma'aser sheni. I now can't say, well, now there's a second pledge on top of this money, it's ma'aser sheni, and also for shlomim as well. The second restriction doesn't apply. It remains ma'aser sheni money, and I can buy with it for whatever I want. It doesn't get the sanctity of shlomim money. Meisvei. So, okay, here's the question. Let's say somebody takes his ma'aser sheni money and he goes to Yerushalayim and he buys an animal for a shlomim. Behema libsart. What he does is he goes backwards. He says, so the case that I just said, just to mention, if a person goes and buys with his ma'aser sheni money an animal, and then he sanctifies that animal as a shlomim, that animal is a shlomim. Why? Because that gets kedushas haguf. That's a higher level of sanctity, and that does become. Now, this is a backwards case, okay? Normally, a person comes to Yerushalayim, he takes his shlomim money, and he buys an animal with which to do his korbanos, right? In that circumstance, when you do that, the rule is that the animal becomes a regular korban, and it no longer has any ma'aser sheni sanctity. So the animal's meat you eat, what happens to the skin? The skin has no ma'aser sanctity anymore. It's been used. So that skin can go right to the Kohen, and it has no ma'aser sheni sanctity, and he can use it whatever way he wants.
You could burn it completely if you wanted to.
And so now also, what if I have a hide, right? If I have a hide of a chaya. A chaya is a wild animal, a deer, right? These kinds of kosher. Goat is a domesticated animal. It could be brought as a korban. A deer or a gazelle. Tigers are not kosher. I'm trying to think of all the kosher wild animals, right? Deer, gazelle, these kinds of giraffe, right? I've get those, so can't make a korban out of them, right? So why would I buy those? Because I'm hungry. So if I buy those and I use that to make a steak dinner, so then also any of the byproducts are also not sanctified anymore because I've eaten what is supposed to be eaten. Okay, so that's the rule. Now, let's say I reverse the case. Guy comes to Yerushalayim and he says, I've got this giraffe and I want to use it as my korban shlomim. Okay, and he buys it for the korban shlomim. Okay?
Good luck getting his head into the door.
So, well, it was 20 amos tall, basically. The door is not the issue, right? Mm-hmm. The animal's the issue. And behema lebasar taiva. Then he says, here's my goat. I'd like to eat my goat as a regular steak. Right? I want to eat goat meat. And now he does that. So lo yotza or lechulin. In those circumstances, so then the skin, the hide of those animals, the animal wasn't, the hide remains ma'aser sheni. Basically, you just took ma'aser sheni money and you said, now this giraffe becomes my ma'aser sheni animal. Right? It doesn't become a korban. And also, my goat becomes a ma'aser sheni goat, and it's not a korban, so therefore the skin remains ma'aser sheni.
With the goat and stuff, doesn't it grow the ma'aser sheni from the money, does it?
It does. The goat becomes the ma'aser sheni. The money is no longer ma'aser sheni, right? It becomes redeemed. Good point. Okay. So now, lav lememra, is that not saying dekani shlamim, right? What's going on here, right? The shlamim, this is Yehuda's point, right? Are we not saying, right, that the kedusha of the shlamim goes on the giraffe? The giraffe's not the korban itself. It's just a financial exchange. Why should that be? After all, we just said that if I take money and I buy, if I designate money that's ma'aser sheni money as money that I'm going to use to buy a eventual korban, it doesn't get that sanctity. Why would the giraffe be designated now for money that I'm eventually going to use as a korban shlamim? So ha'itmar Allah. So we explained in the base medrash about this Mishnah. Amar Rav. Rav says lo kani shlamim. No. The kedusha, the giraffe, doesn't become sanctified as a korban shlamim money that I have to now use this giraffe and exchange it for eventually for a sheep to make a korban shlamim. Umay lo yatsa or lechulin. But what does it mean that the skin does not go free, go out to as a non-consecrated item? Hachi kamer. This is what it means to say. Eina betoras latzeis ha'or lechulin. It has no sanctification as a shlomim at all. Therefore, it's essentially just like taking here's money and I'm changing it over to this money. I'm just taking this money and now it's a giraffe, which has a value of money. The giraffe is now still completely just like money. It has no sanctity as a shlomim. It just simply meiser sheni, and therefore all of the giraffe is meiser sheni, and that's what it means. My taima, what is the reason why the skin doesn't go to chulin? Because Amar Rabbi says, Nasa kilokech shur lecharisha. It's just the same thing as if you were to take meiser sheni money and I'm going to buy an ox, which theoretically could be a korban, but I'm going to use this ox in order to plow my field. Now, using the ox to plow your field, you're not designating this ox as a korban at all. Therefore, the entire ox now just becomes a valued item. It has no kedusha to it at all other than meiser sheni. So the entire value of the ox is still meiser sheni. And if I use my ox for whatever, every part of that ox is still meiser sheni. Okay, itmar. It has been said, Hamatvis mos meiser sheni l'shlamim. If somebody in the basement says, if somebody says this money is going to be designated, this is my meiser sheni money, I'm going to designate some of it as a shlamim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kani, Rabbi Eliezer Amar Lo Kani. Rabbi Yochanan says it does count as becomes a shlamim money. It's reserved as shlamim, not like we've been saying all along. Rabbi Yochanan says it does. Rabbi Eliezer says it does not. Va'aliba the Rabbi Yehuda de Amar meiser mamon hed yodhu. Now, this is according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says, what is the status of meiser sheni money? Is it yours or is it Hashem's? I mean, it could be looked at either way. It's yours in that you bring it to Yerushalayim and you eat it.
You put meiser sheni money away for Hashem,
so therefore Rabbi Meir says it's Hashem's money because you can only eat it. He puts restrictions on it. You can only eat it in Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's yours because you can eat whatever you want with it. So, mamon head, this is according to Rabbi Yehuda, says mamon head yodhu. So, if a person, for example, decided that he wanted to go to Yerushalayim, he wants to get married, and he goes and buys a ring with his meiser sheni money, and he gives it to a woman, he's married. She's got meiser sheni, right? She's going to have to buy her ring out of meiser sheni in order to, right? But that works, right? Dekani. So now this is where we're going to say that's according to Rabbi Yochanan, right, and Rabbi Eliezer. So in that circumstance, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer, they don't argue in that case. Why? Because it's your money. So therefore, if it's your money, of course you can make a donation and turn it into a shlamim. Ki pligi, the argument to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yochanan is aliba the Rabbi Meir is only in Rabbi Meir's opinion. Damar meiser mamon gavoahu. Rabbi Meir says meiser sheni money belongs to Hashem, right? If you take it to Yerushalayim and you say I'm marrying a woman with it, that's great, but it's not your ring. Right? It's Hashem gave it to you to do a mitzvah with it, but it's not yours. So therefore,
it's like your rental.
It's like that, exactly. A borrowing. You're borrowing your things from Hashem. So man da'amar lokani Rabbi Meir. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, he says that you can't make a designation of it being a shlamim because he holds very straightforward like Rabbi Meir. Of course, you can't say this is a shlamim. It's not your money. You can't promise it for anything, right? You want to go buy a shlamim, go buy a shlamim, but you can't say, I designate, you have no rights to it. Uman de Amar Kevin de Maser Korev Shlamim ki mitfasas leinami tafis. So, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, he says, look, if I want to take the money and go buy an animal, and then that would be a shlamim, that would work. So therefore, why is it I can't designate the money as a shlamim? That should work. So he says, that's the exception. I can do that. That's Rabbi Yochanan Shita. Okay, so now we're going to ask a question. Meisvei, so we ask the question. Hamatvis mal sheni l'sheni. Brisa says, Hamatvis mos meiser sheni l'shlamim. Somebody designates his meiser sheni money, and he says, I'm going to buy a shlamim with it. Keshuhu podon, when you redeem that money, right, now I've got $100 here. Now what happens? I want to redeem the money. Mosif alein shnei chomoshin. You have to add a fifth twice. Why is that? Echad lehektish ve'echad lemeiser. There's a rule. If I'm going to take my meiser sheni money, but I've got my meiser sheni, I grew wheat, so now I've got $100 worth of wheat. If I want to now, I don't want to carry $100 worth of wheat. I'd rather carry money. So I go to redeem, and I know the value of this wheat is $100. Well, the rule is that in order to protect the value, that if you want to sell it to somebody else, great, take the money. But if you're going to redeem it yourself, you have to add a fifth to the value as sort of like inflation, so that way you don't rip yourself off, right? You don't rip off the Meiser.
Is that a good charging interest by any chance?
It isn't, because you're charging yourself interest, right? Remember, you're taking the money, you're spending it in Yerushalayim, and you're eating it anyway, right? But this is also, when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, we're going to see the rules of charging Meiser apply to interpersonal loans. They don't apply to circumstances where you're buying from the Beis Hamikdash. So if I have something which I designated, let's say I designate something as a shlomim, and now I want to redeem that and turn it onto money. So obviously the animal itself, I couldn't do that. But if I want to redeem, I say, well, this weed is hektish, and now I want to redeem it onto money. I also have a rule I have to add a fifth. Now that this money is Meiser Sheni, and I also designated it for Shlomim, it's both. I've got to add a fifth twice, right? You're getting 40% surcharge, right? I'm going to add my surcharge on top of a surcharge. So now, so therefore, this seems to imply that Rabbi Yochanan is correct, that in fact, if I designate the money, if I designate the money as shlomim, that it gets a sanctity. Otherwise, why am I adding an extra fifth? Mi savar divrei akol he. So he says, well, wait a second. We didn't say that Rabbi Yochanan's, right, that this issue was according to everybody, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Money, Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Remember, everybody said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that you can designate Meiser money as Shlamim money, because he said it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. So this price is according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. He says, of course, it becomes Meiser money at the same time, Meiser Sheni money. Okay, next Mishnah. Omer harei alai toda. Person says, I am going to bring a korban toda. Shelo yavi ela minayin. Sorry, I skipped. Minayin omer harei alai toda. Shelo yavi ela minachulin. How do I know that person says, I'm going to bring a korban toda? So how do I know that he has to bring, if he says I'm going to bring a toda, it has to be from chulin money, not from Meiser Sheni money? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, V'zavachta Pesach laHashem Elokecha tzon uvakar. When you bring a korban Pesach to Hashem Elokecha from sheep and from cattle. Now, the problem is, as we know from a few days ago, your korban Pesach wasn't a large animal. It was only a goat or a sheep. Those are the only animals you can bring as a korban Pesach. V'halo Pesach ein ba'el min hakvasim min ha'izim. You can only bring korban Pesach from sheep. So why is the pasuk says when you want to bring your korban Pesach, you're going to bring it from sheep or from a bakar? Bakar is larger livestock, cows, bulls, can't bring it from that. So, im kain matam lomar tonuvakar. Why does the pasuk say that you should bring your korban pesach from those types of large animals? Lahakish kol haba min atzonu min abakar lepesach. The answer is we're making a connection. Any korban which comes from any type of animal has the same rules of korban pesach, and that is ma pesach davar shebechova. Just like korban pesach is an obligatory animal. You said you can't, right? That's not your pledge. You bring korban pesach because you have to. Since it's an obligation on you, you can't satisfy an obligation from money that is already consecrated for another purpose. You've got to bring your own money in order to satisfy that. So too, any other type of requirement of pledge, right? You made yourself required because you pledged. Well, now you got to bring your own money. You can't use Meiser Sheni money. Obviously, if you had said, I'm going to bring it from Meiser Sheni money, that's okay. But if you didn't specify, it's got to be unconsecrated money. Therefore, if a person were to say, I am obligated to bring korban toda, I am obligated to bring korban shlamim, now that you're obligated to bring that offering, you can't bring them ela min chulin except from chulin. Unesachem. Now, what about the wine that comes together, right, with the korban toda or the shlamim? Bechol makom, right? That you can bring from meiser, right, or chulin. It doesn't matter. Lo yavu. Bechol makom. Lo yavu ela min chulin. Nevertheless, right, even though, right, this person says, I'm allowed to bring them from meiser or from chulin, he has to bring them from chulin because the Torah isn't. Right? Right. The only permission. Why is that? Because the only permission to bring a korban from Meiser Sheni is because you're going to eat it anyway, right? And that's the main purpose of Meiser Sheni, is to eat. But the wine that comes together, the nesachim, the wine that comes with it, that gets poured out. You don't drink that wine. So therefore, that shouldn't come from Meiser Sheni, no matter what, right? B'chol makom, right? Even if he said, I'm going to bring it from Meiser Sheni, that's what means B'chol makom. Even if I say I'm going to bring it from Meiser Sheni, you can't bring it from Meiser Sheni because it's not edible. Okay, says the Gemara. Upesach kufei minolam. Now, we said that we learned it from Korban Pesach. Where's the source for Korban Pesach? How do I know Korban Pesach can't come from my Meiser Sheni? So the answer is, D'Tanya, we don't break. So Rabbi Lezer says, Nemar Pesach b'Mitzrayim v'Nemar Pesach ledoros. There's a Korban Pesach that is in the Psukim, talking about when they left Mitzrayim, they made a Korban Pesach, and now there was also Korban Pesach, where the Torah goes back and learns over the rules of Korban Pesach, which apply to all time, right? The rules are different in Mitzrayim to the rules that were applicable, right? In Mitzrayim, we're going to see some differences. For example, they didn't throw the blood on a Mizbeach in Mitzrayim. There was no Mizbeach. They put it on their doorposts. We don't put it on our doorposts. So therefore, there are differences in Mitzrayim to the way they did it later.
The only time we did it on doorposts was because
that's correct, and so therefore that only happened in Mitzrayim. So ma Pesach Hamar Mitzrayim lo ba'el min achulin, but we're going to say that there are connections between the two. Just like the Korban Pesach could only come from Chulin. Why? There was no Meiser Sheni, right? Because they weren't in Eretz Yisrael yet, and there's no obligation to take Trumas and Meiser, some produce grown outside of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, obviously, the Korban Pesach came from Chulin, of Pesach HaOmer L'Dor. So too, that's the rule for Pesach for all times. It must be from a animal that was not purchased with Meiser Sheni funds. Lo ba'el min achulin. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, time out. V'chidon efshar mishi efshar. What's the rule? It was impossible in Mitzrayim to bring it from Meiser Sheni. So you're going to decide that now that it's possible that I can bring it from Meiser Sheni, I'm going to say, well, since in Mitzrayim it was impossible, now I can't bring it, right? That was two different circumstances. I could have brought it, I just didn't because it wasn't possible for me to have Meiser Sheni. But now that it's possible, maybe I can. So he says, I can't. Is that a general rule that I can learn the impossible from the? I can learn the possible from the impossible. So Amar Lo, Rabbi Eliezer answers back. Afal pishi efshar rai gedolahi v'nilman himena. So he says, no, that is exactly right. Even though it was not possible in Mitzrayim to bring it from Meiser Sheni, that's the proof. And therefore, from now on, even though it is possible, you can't bring it from there. Chazer Rabbi Akiva v'dano dinacher. Okay, so he sees that Rabbi Eliezer didn't accept his point about it being impossible. So he says, well, I'm gonna prove to you that you can't learn from Pesach Mitzrayim, right? You can't prove that. Why? Look at other differences. By Pesach Mitzrayim, there was no Mizbeach. You didn't burn the fats on the Mizbeach. There was no blood application on the Mizbeach. How are you learning from Mitzrayim, the Pesach of Mitzrayim, any laws? They're completely different. Pei beis and beis. Tomar Pesach doors, you're going to say now you're going to learn from Pesach for all generations, Shaton Matan Damim, where you do have to apply blood, Ve'emurin Legabe Mizbeach, and you have to burn the fats on the Mizbeach. So Amar Lo, Rabbi Eliezer answers back to Rabbi Akiva, Harehu Omer, Ve'havadis ha'avoda hazos b'chodesh hazeh. Right? Pasuk says, when Bnei Yisrael left Mitzrayim, after they made the Korban Pesach, it says, when you get to Eretz Yisrael, you're going to do the service in this month. You're going to do this service. Shiyu kol avodo shel chodesh hazeh kazeh, that all of the services of the Pesach that you're going to do in this month are going to be done like you did the Korban in Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right now, there are contradictions in the other psukim, and when specified and contradictory, so then those contradictions, the law of the latter applies. But when there's no contradiction, this pasuk is specifying that we otherwise learn from Pesach Mitzrayim. So therefore, he didn't listen to Rabbi Akiva's 2 points. It says, of course you can learn from Pesach Mitzrayim that you didn't bring it from Meiser Sheni. And it is, of course you can learn it, even though there are differences, you can learn for all generations from that Korban Pesach. Now, let's talk about Rabbi Akiva for a moment, right? This issue that bothered Rabbi Akiva of learning from that which is possible from that which is impossible. The Rabbi Akiva, what is Rabbi Akiva holding? What is he arguing? I savar law de'ein don and efshar misha efshar leiku b'mil say. Why does Rabbi Akiva, if he holds that you can't learn from the possible from the impossible, then why does he bring a second pasuk? He just say, okay, that's my opinion. I disagree with you, Rabbi Eliezer, because you can't learn from Pesach where you could bring it from Meiser Sheni from a Pesach where you couldn't. So, and if he changed his mind, and now Rabbi Akiva said, "Oh, Rabbi Eliezer, thank you very much. You're my Rebbe, and thank you for teaching me. And now I know that you can learn the possible from the impossible." V'hai delo gamar mi Pesach Mitzrayim mishum hay pirchahu Pesach midbar yochiach. So he says, "I don't understand, right? Why he's not agreeing with Rabbi Eliezer that he learned that Pesach Mitzrayim that you can't bring from Meiser, right? So he should say." He should be just, why did he bring the first question in the first place? He doesn't agree with it anymore. Just bring the second question, right? Just say Pesach in the midbar, right? That he should just learn from the second pasuk, from the second in the. In other words, he's saying, I changed my mind. I can learn the possible from the impossible. Okay, so then what's the second time they learned about Korban Pesach? They were in the desert. Well, you couldn't have Meiser Sheni in the desert either. They weren't growing anything there either. And there, they did throw the blood on the Mizbeach. There, they did burn the Imur. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva's whole second question doesn't even start. If I can't learn from the impossible, I still agree I can't learn the possible from the impossible. So now that I understand I can't learn it from the Pesach in Mitzrayim, but the one in the desert I could learn from, because the one in the desert is exactly the way we did the Korban Pesach in the future generations. And from there, I still would learn it's not from Meiser Sheni. So the answer is no. Rabbi Akiva maintained his problem, his shita. He maintained that you can't learn the possible from the impossible. And why did he bring the second question? Is because he was saying to Rabbi Eliezer, your shita is that you learn it from the Pesach in Mitzrayim. L'dvar of Rabbi Eliezer kamar. According to your reasoning, you can't learn it from Pesach Mitzrayim either. L'didi, according to me, ain't done an efshar mishi efshar. I can't learn it from Mitzrayim, and I can't learn it from the desert. Can't learn it because it's possible for it to come from Meiser Sheni now that we live in Eretz Yisrael, and back then it was impossible. So I can't learn it either way. But l'didach, according to you, who says that you could learn the possible from the impossible, damar don nefshar mishi efshar, mat lePesach Mitzrayim shekein enoton matan damim ve'imur legabe mizbeach tomar Pesach doros shetun matan damim ve'imur legabe mizbeach. Why are you learning it from the Egyptian Korban Pesach when the Egyptian Korban Pesach doesn't have the same rules as the regular Korban Pesach? The Amar le Rabbi Eliezer ve'avadata, to which Rabbi Eliezer answered, no, you can. Pasuk specifically allows me to do so, and therefore I can. I don't need to go to the Pesach that they learned in the desert. Rabbi Eliezer, now that Rabbi Akiva has asked him this question, so lay malay, why doesn't Rabbi Eliezer just answer Rabbi Akiva? Well, I don't have to learn it from the Pesach Mitzrayim, right? After all, Pesach Midbar Yochiach. I could learn it from the Korban Pesach in the desert, which also wasn't coming from Meiser Sheni. Why is he insistent on learning it from the Pesach that was in Mitzrayim? So the answer is L'dvarav Rabbi Akiva kamar lei. He's saying, according to you, Rabbi Akiva, my way works. L'didi don enafshar mishi efshar. According to me, I could learn from the Pesach Mitzrayim. I could learn from the desert. Either way, that doesn't matter to me. Umishum hai pircha. Right? But because your second question that you can't learn from Pesach Mitzrayim, Pesach Midbar Yochiach, that the Pesach of the Midbar should prove it, but L'didach, Damar Ein Don Efshar Mishi Efshar, but according to you, right, who says you can't learn the possible for the impossible, I still wouldn't be able to learn it from the Pesach in the desert. Therefore, according to your reason that you don't learn the possible from the impossible, I'm going to go back and prove to you that you can learn it from Mitzrayim anyway, because the pasuk goes out of its way to specify that I can learn from the Pesach Mitzrayim regardless. Okay, so now, the Hashtanami. Now the Rabbi Eliezer brings, right, on the Vavad to Lifruch, so Rabbi Akiva can still ask, and he says, I can't learn the Efshar mi Efshar, I can't learn the possible from the impossible. His question still stands. Even though you told me that I can learn other things from it, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Zosomeris ein mishivin al hahekesh. What Rav Sheshes is saying is that I can't, even though there's a logic, Rabbi Akiva is mentioning, it was impossible, impossible, that's a logic. He says that there's a hekesh, right? The hekesh says that that just like this Pesach that we're doing in Mitzrayim, the rule applies to Pesach for all generations. So then that's a hekesh, right? I'm comparing Pesach for all generations to Pesach in Mitzrayim. Even though you'll show me a logical reason why you shouldn't look at the two of them together, the comparison between the two that the pasuk makes overrides any logical disagreements, any logical reasons for separating the two. Ube tarbitza, now in the base medrash, right? Tarbitza from the Lashon harbatza satorah, right? In the base medrash, amor. So they said about our Mishnah that says that something which is a chova, something which is obligatory that you can't bring from, you have to bring from chulin. V'chidavar halamed behekesh chozer umelamed behekesh. We have a problem because in the first place, how do you know that Pesach for all generations has to be brought from chulin? The answer was from a hekesh, from Mitzrayim. And then how do I know that that applies to all other korbanos, the korban shlamim? A hekesh from Pesach, because it's tzonu bakar. So I have a hekesh and a hekesh. How can you learn a hekesh to another hekesh? Didn't we learn that was not allowed? Right? That was the Zvachim Gemara. You can't learn from one hekesh to another Pesach. So another hekesh. So he says, Bechlole itmar Pesach kule chadam milsahi. The answer is, there's no hekesh to hekesh, right? A korban Pesach is in itself a korban. So therefore, all the Pesach, this is the rule that we're going to learn from Pesach for all generations, for everything, from all the korbanos. Pesach is the word that stands in to mean all korbanos. That from Mitzrayim, we're going to learn this rule that we learned in Mitzrayim by Pesach, that all korbanos can come from Meiser Sheni, can't come from Meiser Sheni. That's going to be a rule now for all korbanos. And so therefore, all the Pesach, because we call the Pesach, it says tzonu bakar, which means it's coming from all types of animals, and we know the Pesach doesn't. Pesach is in that pasuk is a stand-in for the name of all korbanos. All korbanos have to be brought from all obligatory offerings have to be brought from chulin funds, not from Meiser Sheni funds. Okay, so that's where a good place for us to stop. Rabbi, we'll go.